The early morning mist hung low over Oakwood Cemetery, wrapping the weathered gravestones in a soft gray blanket. Sunlight was just beginning to break through the tall oak trees, casting long shadows across the peaceful grounds. Among the dancing beams of light, a lone figure moved carefully between the rows of graves. Lily Chen wasn't supposed to be in the cemetery that morning. As a botanist studying native plants in the area, she had planned to explore the nearby forest, but her attention had been caught by the unusual: wildflowers growing among the graves, vibrant splashes of color among the gray stones that seemed to tell stories of their own. These shouldn't be blooming this time of year, she whispered to herself, kneeling down to examine a patch of unusual purple flowers. Their presence here was a small mystery, the kind that made her job so fascinating. She carefully took photographs and notes, moving methodically through the oldest section of the cemetery. The weathered stones around her dated back nearly 100 years, many of the inscriptions worn away by time and weather. This section of Oakwood was rarely visited anymore, except by the occasional historian or distant family member searching for roots. The groundskeeper only came through every few weeks, letting nature reclaim parts of the sacred ground in its gentle way. As Lily rounded a particularly large oak tree, something caught her eye, movement where there should be none. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Among the still graves, something was sliding across the ground with purpose. A snake. Lily remained motionless, watching as the large black snake, its scales glistening in the morning light, slithered between two gravestones. It was a common black rat snake, harmless to humans but impressive in size. This one must have been nearly 5 feet long. "Hello there," she said softly, keeping a respectful distance. "You're a big fellow, aren't you?" The snake paused as if hearing her words, then continued on its path, disappearing behind a tilted gravestone that leaned at a precarious angle. Lily waited a moment, then curiosity pulled her forward. She'd always had a soft spot for all creatures, even the ones that made others uncomfortable. The gravestone was old, the dates barely visible beneath a film of green moss. Lily knelt down, brushing away some of the growth with gentle fingers. The stone belonged to someone named Eleanor Blackwood, who had died in 1923. Below the name was a simple inscription: "Beloved wife, taken too soon." As Lily examined the stone, she noticed something unusual. The ground where the snake had disappeared seemed disturbed. Years of working outdoors had taught her to recognize when something wasn't quite right with the soil. It appeared as if something had been digging, not the organized work of the groundskeeper, but the random pattern of an animal. "What were you up to?" she murmured, looking for the snake. The reptile was nowhere to be seen, but it had left behind something strange. Where the earth had been disturbed, Lily could see a small opening, too regular to be natural. And within that opening, something caught the sunlight and reflected it back with a dull gleam, something metal. Lily hesitated, unsure if she should disturb what might be part of a grave. Her scientific mind battled with respect for the dead. After a moment's consideration, she took out her phone and called the cemetery office. No answer. They wouldn't open for another hour. "I'll just take a quick look," she told herself. "If it's nothing, I'll cover it back up. If it's something important, I'll report it properly." Using a small trowel from her botany kit, Lily carefully widened the opening. The soil was loose, as if it had been disturbed before. As she worked, she became aware of a silence falling over the cemetery. The early morning birds had stopped their singing, and even the gentle rustle of leaves seemed to quiet. It was as if the whole place was holding its breath, watching her. The metal object gradually revealed itself. A small box, roughly the size of a thick book. It was made of tin or some similar metal, now green with age and corrosion, but despite its weathered appearance, it seemed remarkably intact. There was no lock, just a simple clasp that had long since fused shut with rust. Lily sat back on her heels, wondering what to do next. Common sense told her to leave it, to call the authorities and let them handle whatever this was. But something else, something she couldn't quite name, urged her to look inside. After all, who knew how long this box had been buried here? Who knew what secrets it might contain? With trembling fingers, she worked at the clasp, using her trowel as a makeshift lever. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a sigh, the box opened. Inside was a book, a diary bound in faded leather, its pages yellowed with age but still intact. and tucked beside it a small photograph of a woman with solemn eyes and a high-collared dress, the fashion of a bygone era. Lily lifted the diary with careful hands, opening to the first page. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as if the writer had much to say and little time to say it. At the top of the page was a name, Eleanor Blackwood, the same name as on the gravestone. "Oh my," Lily whispered, realizing what she had found. This wasn't just any diary. This belonged to the woman buried here, the woman who had died over 100 years ago. A sudden movement made her jump. The black snake had returned, watching her from a nearby stone with unblinking eyes. It seemed almost protective of the grave, of the secret it had accidentally exposed. "Thank you," Lily said to the snake, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to it. "I'll make sure this gets to the right people." As if satisfied with her answer, the snake slithered away, disappearing into the underbrush. Lily carefully placed the diary back in the box, closed it, and stood up. This wasn't something she could just cover up and forget about. This was a piece of history, a voice from the past that had somehow found its way to her. The sun was higher now, burning away the morning mist. Other visitors would be arriving soon. Lily took one last look at Eleanor Blackwood's grave, at the disturbed soil where the box had lain hidden for so long. "I'll find out your story," she promised the silent stone. Back at her small apartment on the edge of town, Lily placed the metal box on her kitchen table and stared at it. She had signed in at the cemetery office, trying to appear casual as she explained finding something interesting near one of the graves. The elderly man at the desk had barely looked up from his newspaper, merely grunting that items found on the grounds should be turned in. But when she mentioned the name on the gravestone, his interest had sparked. "Blackwood? Eleanor Blackwood?" he had asked, peering at her over reading glasses. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. Local story about that one?" "What kind of story?" Lily had asked, her curiosity growing. "Old town tale. Doctor's wife died young. Some say it wasn't from natural causes, if you catch my meaning, but that's just talk. Been dead and buried nearly 100 years now." His words echoed in her mind as she carefully opened the box again. Inside, the diary seemed to call to her, its pages holding answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask. With a deep breath, Lily opened the diary and began to read. April 15th, 1922. "I fear I must write down what I have seen. Robert says I imagine things, that a woman's mind is easily confused by medical matters. But I know what I saw in his study. The bottles are not what he claims them to be." The handwriting grew more urgent as the entry continued, describing suspicious activities at the writer's husband's medical practice. Eleanor wrote of patients who had died unexpectedly, of conversations overheard late at night, of her growing fear that something sinister was happening under her own roof. Lily read until the light outside her window began to fade, moving through Eleanor's life one page at a time. The final entry was dated just 3 days before the death date on the gravestone, May 2nd, 1923. He knows that I know. I saw it in his eyes at dinner, the way he watched me take each bite, the strange smile when he poured my tea. "I am not well this evening. My hands shake as I write this. If anything should happen to me, let it be known that Robert is not the man this town believes him to be. I fear I have little time left. The box with this diary will be given to Mary to hide, though I pray it never needs to be found." The entry ended there, the final words trailing off as if the writer had been interrupted, or worse. Lily closed the diary, a chill running through her despite the warmth of her apartment. What had she stumbled upon? A century-old murder confession? Evidence of crimes long forgotten? One thing was certain, she couldn't keep this to herself. Whatever secrets Eleanor Blackwood had taken to her grave, they had found their way back to the light of day. And now, thanks to a chance encounter with a snake in a forgotten corner of a cemetery, those secrets were in Lily's hands. She reached for her phone, hesitated, then dialed the number for the local historical society. Whatever happened next, Eleanor Blackwood's story deserved to be heard. After all these years, perhaps justice could finally be served. Outside her window, the sun set on Oakwood Cemetery, where Eleanor's grave stood silent among the shadows. But its secret was no longer buried. The truth, like the snake that had revealed it, had found its way out at last. Lily couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eleanor Blackwood's final diary entry. the handwriting growing shakier with each word, as if the woman knew her time was running out. Outside, rain tapped against the windows of Lily's apartment, a gentle rhythm that usually lulled her to sleep, but tonight only seemed to echo the urgency of Eleanor's words. By morning, Lily's call to the Historical Society had been returned. A man named Thomas Garrett had left a voicemail, his voice betraying excitement even in the brief message. Ms. Chen, this is Thomas from the Oakwood Historical Society. Your message about Eleanor Blackwood's diary. If this is genuine, it could be incredibly significant. Please call me back as soon as possible. Lily made the call while sipping her morning coffee, the metal box sitting on the table before her like a visitor from another time. Ms. Chen, thank you for calling back, Thomas answered on the second ring. I hope you don't mind the early hour. Your message had me up half the night thinking. I was up anyway, Lily admitted. I couldn't stop reading the diary. You've read it then? All of it? Most of it. It's disturbing. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The Blackwood case has been something of an obsession of mine for years, Thomas finally said. There have always been rumors, but never any proof. Until now, perhaps. Would you be willing to meet today? I'd very much like to see this diary. They arranged to meet at the Historical Society's small office downtown at 10. As Lily gathered her things, she found herself glancing once more at the diary. What secrets had Eleanor taken to her grave? And why had they surfaced now after all these years? The Oakwood Historical Society was housed in a Victorian building that had once been the town's library. Inside, the smell of old books and polished wood created an atmosphere of quiet dignity. Thomas Garrett met Lily at the door, a tall man in his 50s with kind eyes and an air of scholarly enthusiasm. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming, he said, extending his hand. And thank you for contacting us instead of, well, the tabloids. Something like this could easily become sensationalized. I just want to do the right thing, Lily said, following him into a small office lined with bookshelves. Eleanor deserves that much, doesn't she? Thomas smiled. You speak of her as if you knew her. After reading her diary, I feel like I do, Lily admitted. She was intelligent, observant, afraid toward the end. May I? Thomas asked, gesturing to the metal box Lily had placed on his desk. Lily nodded and he opened it with reverent hands. The photograph of Eleanor slid out first and Thomas held it up to the light. Yes, this is her. There are only 2 known photographs of Eleanor Blackwood in existence. Well, 3 now, I suppose. He turned his attention to the diary, opening it carefully. His expression grew more serious as he read the first page, then flipped through to random entries, his eyes scanning the yellowed pages. This appears to be authentic, he said at last. The handwriting matches samples we have from church records. The dating style, the ink, everything fits, so what do we do now? Lily asked. Thomas closed the diary and looked at her thoughtfully. Would you be willing to help me with this? I could use someone with a fresh perspective, and you did find it after all. What exactly would we be doing? Research to start. If Eleanor's suspicions were correct, if her husband was involved in the deaths of his patients and possibly his wife, we need to find corroborating evidence. Newspaper accounts, hospital records, anything that might support her claims. Lily thought of the grave, of the snake that had led her to this discovery. It felt as if she had been chosen somehow, as strange as that seemed. I'll help, she said. They began that very day. Thomas led Lily to the Society's archives, a room in the basement filled with filing cabinets, microfilm readers, and boxes of documents. The town newspaper, the Oakwood Herald, has been in print since 1895, Thomas explained, pulling out a drawer filled with microfilm reels. I've gone through some of these before looking for anything unusual about Dr. Blackwood, but now I know exactly what to look for. They started with the months leading up to Eleanor's death, scanning newspaper accounts for mentions of patient deaths or anything related to Dr. Robert Blackwood's medical practice. The work was tedious, but Lily found herself drawn into the rhythm of it, the slow unspooling of the past. Here, Thomas said suddenly, pointing to a small article from March 1923. Judith Hayes, age 42, died after a short illness. Dr. Blackwood attended her in her final hours. Eleanor mentions a Mrs. Hayes in her diary, Lily said, flipping through the pages. Here, April 2nd. She writes that Mrs. Hayes came to the house in distress, claiming her husband had been giving her medicine that made her feel worse instead of better. They found more cases, a banker who died of heart troubles after consulting Dr. Blackwood about insomnia, a young mother who passed away from complications following a routine procedure, an elderly man whose rapid decline puzzled his family. In each case, Thomas said, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his tired eyes, Dr. Blackwood was the attending physician, and in each case the death was unexpected or followed a relatively minor complaint. Could it really be coincidence? Lily asked. 7 deaths in 8 months, all patients of the same doctor? That stretches coincidence to the breaking point. As the afternoon wore on, they pieced together more of the story. Dr. Robert Blackwood had been the town's most respected physician, a man known for his charitable work and bedside manner. He had moved to Oakwood in 1920 with his young wife Eleanor, setting up a practice that quickly became successful. Here's something interesting, Thomas said, looking up from a ledger he'd been examining. Dr. Blackwood made several large deposits to his bank account in the months before Eleanor's death. Far more than his practice would have generated. Where did the money come from? That's the question, isn't it? And here's another odd thing. After Eleanor died, he seems to have withdrawn from society. No more charity work, fewer patients, but he stayed in town until his own death in 1947. No one ever suspected him? Lily asked, finding it hard to believe a man could get away with multiple murders, including that of his own wife, without raising eyebrows. It was a different time, Thomas explained. Doctors were above reproach, almost godlike in their communities, and tuberculosis, which was listed as Eleanor's cause of death, was common enough not to raise suspicions. But she didn't have tuberculosis, did she? Lily said softly. Not according to her diary. Thomas shook his head. I don't believe so. In her final entries, she described symptoms that could be consistent with arsenic poisoning: headaches, stomach pains, weakness. Arsenic was readily available then, used in everything from wallpaper to rat poison. The realization of what they were uncovering settled over the room like a shadow. This wasn't just a historical mystery. It was a tragedy, a crime that had gone unpunished for nearly a century. We need to find out what happened after her death, Lily said. Did anyone else get suspicious? Did the death stop? Thomas nodded. Those are excellent questions. Let's keep going. As the afternoon turned to evening, they continued their research, moving from newspapers to town records, medical logs to personal correspondences that had been donated to the Historical Society over the years. Picture began to emerge of Dr. Blackwood as a man with secrets, a past that included a brief stay at a hospital in another state, rumors of unorthodox treatments, and patients who had complained about his methods before their unexpected deaths. Look at this, Lily said, holding up a letter she'd found in a collection of correspondence from the hospital board. It's from another doctor, questioning Blackwood's diagnosis in the Hayes case. He was overruled by the board, but he clearly had doubts. And here, Thomas added, showing her a newspaper article from a neighboring town, a Dr. William Morrison, who apparently knew Blackwood from medical school, moved to the area just after Eleanor's death. He made some veiled accusations about physicians who violate their oath but never named names. The article says he left town suddenly a month later. They worked until the Historical Society was due to close, the building growing quiet around them as other staff members left for the day. Thomas looked at the material spread across the table, the pieces of a puzzle that had been hidden for decades. We've made good progress, he said, but there's more to uncover. Eleanor's diary mentions a nurse named Mary, the one she planned to give the diary to. We need to find out who she was and what happened to her. Lily nodded, gathering her notes. The day's research had left her with more questions than answers, but also with a growing sense of purpose. Eleanor Blackwood's story deserved to be told, her death explained. Her accusations either proven or laid to rest. As she prepared to leave, Thomas carefully placed the diary back in its metal box. I'll lock this in our secure archives tonight, he said. It's evidence now. Evidence of what exactly? Lily asked. Thomas met her gaze steadily. Murder, Ms. Chen. I believe we're looking at evidence of murder. Outside, the evening had turned cool, the streets of Oakwood growing quiet as shops closed and people headed home. Lily walked slowly, her mind still in 1923, still with Eleanor and her terrible secret. Tomorrow they would continue their search. Tomorrow they would dig deeper into Dr. Blackwood's past, into the mysterious nurse named Mary, into the town that had either missed or ignored a killer in their midst. But tonight, As Lily looked up at the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky, she felt as if Eleanor was watching, waiting for justice that had been delayed for far too long. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Historical Society as Lily arrived the next day, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She found Thomas already at work, surrounded by stacks of documents he must have pulled from the archives before the building officially opened. "You're early," she said, handing him one of the coffees. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor's handwriting, that final entry." He took a sip and gestured to the piles of papers. "I've been going through old hospital records. The Society has copies of most of them, donated years ago when the old Oakwood General Hospital was torn down." Lily settled into a chair across from him. "Find anything?" "Maybe. I've been looking for this Mary person the nurse Eleanor mentioned. There were 3 nurses named Mary working at the hospital during that time period." He pushed a yellowed staff photograph toward her. Mary Wilson, Mary Thornton, and Mary Davis. Lily studied the black and white image of hospital staff arranged in formal rows. Dr. Blackwood stood prominently in the center, tall and distinguished with a well-trimmed beard. The nurses were positioned behind the doctors, their white uniforms crisp, their expressions serious. "Do we know which one was closest to Eleanor?" Lily asked. "Not yet, but I have an idea where to look next." Thomas stood and crossed to a filing cabinet. The local church kept detailed records of their congregation. If Eleanor was friends with any of these women, there might be some mention in parish activities, charity committees, that sort of thing. They spent the morning digging through church newsletters and committee minutes from the 1920s, looking for connections between Eleanor Blackwood and any of the 3 Marys. The work was tedious, but Lily found herself drawn into the everyday lives of these long-gone women, their fundraisers for new hymnals, their debates over flower arrangements, their coordination of food baskets for the poor. "Here," Lily said suddenly, pointing to a list of volunteers for a charity bazaar in 1922. Eleanor Blackwood and Mary Davis were both on the planning committee for the church's Easter fundraiser. Thomas leaned over to see. "Good catch. Let's see if there are other connections." They found several more instances where Eleanor and Mary Davis had worked together: a Christmas pageant, weekly sewing circles, a hospital charity drive. In one newsletter, there was even a small photograph of the 2 women standing side by side at a church picnic, both smiling at the camera. "They definitely knew each other," Thomas said. "Now we need to find out what happened to Mary Davis after Eleanor died. Did she stay in town? Did she ever speak about Eleanor or Dr. Blackwood?" Tracking Mary Davis proved challenging. She disappeared from hospital records a few months after Eleanor's death, her name simply absent from staff listings beginning in September 1923. "She left town," Thomas said, frowning at the records. "But why? And where did she go?" They expanded their search, looking through county records, marriage certificates, and obituaries from neighboring towns. By mid-afternoon, Lily was beginning to lose hope when Thomas made a discovery in a stack of old letters that had been donated to the society by the family of the former hospital administrator. "Listen to this," he said, excitement in his voice. "Regretfully, I must accept your resignation, though I urge you to reconsider. Your claims about Dr. Blackwood are most serious. But without evidence, the board cannot take action against such a respected physician. Perhaps a position at your cousin's hospital in Portland would indeed be best for all concerned." It's dated August 17, 1923, and it's addressed to Mary Davis. "She knew," Lily said softly. "She tried to speak up about him." "And was essentially forced out of town for it," Thomas added grimly. "But this gives us a lead. If she went to Portland, maybe there are records of her there." Using the Historical Society's computer, they searched for information about Mary Davis in Portland records from the 1920s. After several false starts, they found a marriage certificate from 1925 for a Mary Davis to a James Henderson, and later records showing she had worked as a nurse at Portland General Hospital until her retirement in 1958. "She lived a long life," Thomas said, showing Lily an obituary from 1983. "Mary Henderson, née Davis, passed away at the age of 84, survived by 2 children, 5 grandchildren. Too long ago to talk to her directly," Lily said, disappointed. "But maybe her family knows something. If Eleanor gave her the diary, if she told her children about what happened in Oakwood, Thomas nodded. It's worth a try. The obituary mentions a daughter, Catherine Henderson Wilson, who would be in her 70s now. Let me see if I can find her. While Thomas made phone calls, Lily returned to Eleanor's diary, reading entries she had skipped in her initial rush through the pages. In the earlier entries, Eleanor wrote about her life in Oakwood, her charitable work, her friendship with Mary Davis. There were also mentions of her husband's growing obsession with certain medical cases, his late nights in his study, and his increasingly secretive behavior. One entry from February 1923 caught her attention. Robert's experimental treatments continue, though he refuses to discuss them with me. Today I overheard him speaking with a man from the pharmaceutical company. Something about testing new compounds, effects more dramatic than expected. When I entered the room, they fell silent immediately. Later, I found a notebook in his desk drawer, filled with observations of his patients' reactions to something he refers to only as Compound B. The dosages increase with each entry, as do the severity of symptoms noted. What is he doing to these poor people? Lily looked up from the diary, a chill running through her despite the warmth of the room. Thomas, she called across the room where he was still on the phone. I think Dr. Blackwood was experimenting on his patients, using them as test subjects for some kind of drug. Thomas finished his call and came over, his expression serious but excited. That would explain a lot. And I may have just found someone who can tell us more. That was Catherine Wilson's son, Peter. His mother passed away last year, but he says she had boxes of his grandmother's papers in her attic. He's never gone through them, but he's willing to let us take a look. How soon can we see them? He lives about 2 hours from here. We could go tomorrow if you're free. The next morning, they set out early for the small coastal town where Peter Wilson lived. The drive took them through rolling countryside that gradually gave way to glimpses of the ocean, blue and vast in the distance. Peter Wilson was a friendly man in his 50s who greeted them with coffee and curiosity. Never thought anyone would be interested in Grandma's old papers, he said, leading them to the garage where several cardboard boxes sat stacked against a wall. Mom always said Grandma had secrets from back in Oakwood, but she wouldn't talk about them, even when Mom asked directly. Mind if we take a look? Thomas asked. Help yourselves. I'll be inside if you need anything. The boxes contained a lifetime of memories, photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, cards from patients, nursing certificates. Lily and Thomas worked methodically, carefully sorting through the items, looking for anything related to Oakwood or the Blackwoods. In the third box, buried beneath nursing school memorabilia, they found a manila envelope labeled simply Eleanor in faded handwriting. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon and a small journal. These are letters from Eleanor to Mary, Lily said, carefully unfolding one. Listen to this. My dear friend, I cannot express how grateful I am for your concern. You are right to question R's methods. I have done the same with troubling results. The medicines he claims to be standard treatments are anything but. I have taken samples to compare with the hospital's supplies, and they are not the same. And this journal, Thomas said, leafing through the small book. It's Mary's account of her suspicions about Dr. Blackwood. She documented irregular symptoms in patients, unusual treatment orders, death certificates with causes that didn't match symptoms. They spent hours going through the materials, piecing together a disturbing picture of what had happened in Oakwood a century ago. Mary Davis had indeed been given Eleanor's diary, but had hidden it for her own safety after being forced to leave town. The small journal contained her own observations as a nurse, including notes about patients who had died under Dr. Blackwood's care and her growing suspicions about his treatments. Most damning of all was a letter Mary had written but apparently never sent, addressed to the state medical board. In it, she accused Dr. Blackwood of deliberately administering harmful substances to patients under the guise of treatment, and of poisoning his wife when she discovered his activities. Why didn't she send this? Lily wondered, holding the letter carefully. Fear, probably, Thomas said. Look at what happened when she raised concerns to the hospital board. She was the one who had to leave town, not him. And without Eleanor's diary, which she had hidden, she had no real proof. They thanked Peter Wilson and carefully packed the most relevant materials to take back to Oakwood, promising to return everything once they had completed their research. On the drive back, Lily was quiet, thinking about Eleanor and Mary. Two women who had tried to stop a killer but had been silenced by the conventions of their time. "What do we do now?" she finally asked as they neared Oakwood. "We have evidence that Dr. Blackwood was experimenting on patients and that he likely murdered his wife when she found out. But he's been dead for decades. What justice can there be now?" Thomas glanced at her, determination in his eyes. "The truth is its own kind of justice, Lily. Those patients and Eleanor deserve to have their stories told. And there's one more thing we can do." "What's that?" "We can request an exhumation of Eleanor's body. If she was poisoned with arsenic, traces would still be present in her remains. We could finally prove beyond any doubt what really happened to her." Lily thought about the grave, about the snake that had led her to the hidden diary. It felt as if things had come full circle. "Let's do it," she said. "For Eleanor." Getting permission to exhume a body buried nearly a century ago proved more complicated than Lily had imagined. There were forms to file, authorities to convince, and legal hurdles to clear. Without living relatives of Eleanor to give consent, they had to present their case to a county judge, explaining the historical significance and the evidence they had gathered suggesting foul play. 2 weeks after their discovery of Mary Davis's papers, Lily and Thomas stood before Judge Patricia Reynolds, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Let me understand this correctly," the judge said, looking over her reading glasses at them. "You want to dig up the remains of a woman who died in 1923 based on a diary found by—" She glanced down at her notes. "A botanist who was following a snake?" Put that way, it did sound far-fetched. Lily felt her cheeks grow warm. "Your Honor," Thomas said, his voice steady. "The circumstances of the discovery may be unusual, but the evidence we've gathered is substantial. We have Eleanor Blackwood's diary detailing her suspicions about her husband's medical practices, corroborating documentation from a nurse who worked with Dr. Blackwood, and hospital records showing an unusual pattern of deaths among his patients." "And you believe Mrs. Blackwood was murdered by her husband?" the judge asked. "We do," Thomas replied. "Her diary entries describe symptoms consistent with arsenic poisoning, not the tuberculosis listed on her death certificate. If we're correct, traces of arsenic would still be present in her remains, particularly in her hair and nails." Judge Reynolds set down her pen and studied them both. "This is highly irregular. Most exhumation requests come from family members or law enforcement." "We understand that," Lily said, finding her voice. "But Eleanor has no living relatives that we could find, and the police won't open an investigation into a century-old death without more concrete evidence, which you hope to find by disturbing this woman's final rest," the judge observed. "We believe Eleanor would want this," Lily said quietly. "Her last diary entry was a plea for someone to discover the truth. She's been waiting 100 years for justice." Something in Lily's words seemed to reach the judge. She was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'm granting your request, but with conditions. The exhumation must be conducted with proper respect and under the supervision of the county medical examiner. All findings will be properly documented, and the remains reinterred with appropriate ceremony. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Thomas and Lily said together. 3 days later, they stood in Oakwood Cemetery as dawn broke over the trees. A small team had gathered: the county medical examiner, Dr. Patel, 2 assistants with equipment, a representative from the cemetery board, and a local police officer there to observe and ensure everything was done properly. Lily felt strangely nervous as the workers began to carefully remove the soil from Eleanor's grave. It seemed wrong somehow to disturb her rest, even though they were doing it for her sake. The morning was cool and misty, birds just beginning to sing in the trees overhead. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked quietly, noticing her expression. "Just thinking about Eleanor," Lily replied. "When she was buried here, everyone thought she had died of tuberculosis. Her husband probably stood right where we're standing now, accepting condolences from people who had no idea what he'd done." The work continued slowly, respectfully. As they reached the burial depth, Dr. Patel stepped forward to oversee the final stage. The coffin, when revealed, was deteriorated but still intact, protected somewhat by the concrete burial vault that had surrounded it. "Ready?" Dr. Patel asked, looking at the assembled group. At their nods, the assistants carefully opened the coffin lid. Despite the years, Eleanor's remains were remarkably preserved. Her skeleton lay peacefully, still partially clothed in the deteriorated remains of what had once been a fine burial dress. Her skull was turned slightly to one side, as if she were looking at something in her final rest. "There," Dr. Patel said, pointing carefully. "Look at her right hand." Clutched in the skeletal fingers of Eleanor's right hand was a small object, a key, tarnished but intact, that had been hidden from view when she was laid to rest. "That wasn't in any of the burial records," Thomas said, leaning forward for a better look. "Someone must have placed it in her hand just before the coffin was closed," Dr. Patel observed. "A family member, perhaps, or someone who helped prepare her for burial." "Or Mary," Lily whispered. "Mary Davis might have done it." The key was carefully photographed and then removed for examination. Meanwhile, Dr. Patel and his team took samples from Eleanor's remains, hair that had surprisingly survived, nail material, and small bone fragments that would be tested for toxic substances. "The analysis will take some time," Dr. Patel told them as Eleanor's remains were respectfully placed in a new container for reburial. "Arsenic testing is complex, especially on remains this old." "What about the key?" Lily asked. "It must open something important." "It appears to be a small cabinet or box key," the police officer said, examining it. "Antique, probably brass originally. There's something engraved on it, but it's hard to make out with all the tarnish." Back at the Historical Society, while they waited for Dr. Patel's analysis, Lily and Thomas focused on the key. After careful cleaning, they could make out tiny letters engraved on its surface. "R.B. Robert Blackwood," Thomas said. "It's his key, but what does it open?" They had already gone through the town's property records and knew that the Blackwood house still stood on the edge of town, though it had changed hands many times over the decades. Currently it was owned by an elderly couple, the Hendersons, who had lived there for over 30 years. "We need to visit that house," Lily said. "Whatever this key opens might still be there." The Hendersons were surprisingly receptive to their visit, intrigued by the historical significance of their home. "We always knew it had a past," Mrs. Henderson said, serving them tea in what had once been the Blackwood sitting room. "When we bought it, the real estate agent mentioned a doctor had lived here long ago, but we never knew the details." "Have you ever found anything unusual in the house?" Thomas asked. "Hidden compartments, old lockboxes, anything that might need a small key?" Mr. Henderson thought for a moment. "There's an old built-in cabinet in the attic that's always been locked. We never bothered with it, figured it was empty and the key long lost." The attic was dusty and dimly lit, filled with the Hendersons' stored belongings and remnants of previous owners. In the far corner stood a small wooden cabinet built into the wall, its dark wood contrasting with the white plaster surrounding it. "That's it," Mr. Henderson said, pointing. "Been locked as long as we've owned the place." Lily's heart pounded as she approached the cabinet with the key in hand. It looked so ordinary, just a small wooden door with a simple keyhole. Could it really have held Eleanor's secrets all these years? The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, turning with only slight resistance. The cabinet door swung open, revealing a small space that held a single item, a leather-bound journal. Similar to Eleanor's diary but larger, its cover embossed with the initials R.B., Dr. Blackwood's journal. Thomas breathed. Hidden away in his own house where Eleanor must have found it. With the Hendersons' permission, they carefully removed the journal and brought it back to the Historical Society. There, under proper archival conditions, they began to read Dr. Robert Blackwood's private thoughts. The journal was clinical in tone, detailing what Blackwood referred to as his special research into new treatments for various conditions. What began as seemingly legitimate medical inquiry quickly devolved into something darker: experimental compounds administered without patients' knowledge, increased dosages to test tolerance, careful notes on symptoms that were clearly toxic reactions. He was using his patients as guinea pigs, Thomas said grimly, testing compounds for a pharmaceutical company that was paying him for the data. The most disturbing entries began in early 1923, when Blackwood first suspected his wife had discovered his activities. "E has been asking questions about patient treatments," he wrote. "She visited the hospital yesterday and spoke at length with Nurse D. I must ensure her curiosity does not interfere with my work. Too much depends on these trials." As they read on, the entries became more paranoid, more calculated. Blackwood wrote of regrettable but necessary precautions and ensuring E's silence. The final entry, dated May 1st, 1923, just one day before Eleanor's last diary entry, read simply, Began administration today. Small dose in evening tea. Will increase gradually to avoid suspicion. Unfortunate, but I cannot allow the research to be compromised. Lily felt sick reading the cold, detached way Blackwood had planned his wife's murder. He poisoned her slowly, watching her die day by day while pretending to treat her, and then diagnosed her with tuberculosis to avoid any questions, Thomas added. The perfect cover. The next day, Dr. Patel called with his preliminary findings. We've detected significant levels of arsenic in the hair and nail samples, he reported, far higher than would occur naturally, and the pattern of deposition suggests repeated exposure over several weeks, not a single large dose. Exactly how Blackwood described it in his journal, Lily said after they hung up. He poisoned her slowly, making it look like a wasting disease. We have enough evidence now to officially change the historical record, Thomas said. Eleanor Blackwood didn't die of tuberculosis. She was murdered by her husband for threatening to expose his unethical experiments. But there's still one thing I don't understand, Lily said, looking at the key that had started this final chapter of their investigation. How did this key end up in Eleanor's hand? Blackwood would never have put it there. No, Thomas agreed, but someone else might have. Someone who knew what Eleanor had discovered and wanted to leave a clue that might someday lead to the truth. Mary Davis, Lily said softly. She must have slipped it into Eleanor's hand during the funeral preparations, when she would have had a private moment with her friend's body. She couldn't speak the truth openly, but she left this key as a silent witness. A century later, that silent witness had finally spoken, revealing the truth that had been buried with Eleanor Blackwood for so long. News travels fast in small towns. By the time Lily and Thomas had finished documenting their findings, it seemed everyone in Oakwood knew about Eleanor Blackwood and the century-old murder that had been uncovered. The local newspaper ran a front-page story, complete with photographs of Eleanor, her diary, and the grave where Lily had made her initial discovery. You're something of a local celebrity now, Thomas remarked as they sat in the Historical Society, where visitors had been stopping by all day to see the exhibits they'd put together about the case. Lily shook her head. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And follow a snake. Don't downplay it. If you hadn't found that diary, Eleanor's story would still be buried. She'd still be remembered as just another tuberculosis victim, and Dr. Blackwood would have gotten away with murder completely. Lily glanced at the photograph of Eleanor that now sat framed on Thomas's desk. I wonder what she would think of all this attention. I think she'd be grateful, Thomas said quietly. Her last diary entry was practically a plea for someone to discover the truth. You fulfilled that wish 100 years later. The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Thomas answered, listened for a moment, then grinned at Lily. That was Judge Reynolds. She's reviewed all our evidence and the medical examiner's report. She's officially ordering Eleanor's death certificate to be amended to show homicide by arsenic poisoning rather than tuberculosis. It's official then, Lily said, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. We've proved she was murdered. And there's more, Thomas continued. The Historical Society Board has approved a special memorial service for Eleanor and the other victims. The mayor will attend, and they want us to speak. The memorial service was scheduled for the following Sunday afternoon. In the days leading up to it, Lily found herself spending time at Eleanor's grave, now refilled and marked with a temporary sign explaining that a new headstone was coming, one that would tell the true story of her death. Sometimes Lily would just sit quietly beside the grave, thinking about the woman whose secret she had helped uncover. Other times she would talk softly, telling Eleanor about the plans for the memorial, the exhibits at the Historical Society, the newspaper articles that were now spreading her story far beyond Oakwood. People know the truth now, she said one evening, as the sun was setting over the cemetery. They know what your husband did, and what you tried to do to stop him. You didn't die in vain, Eleanor. As she sat there, a movement caught her eye, a familiar black snake slithering between the gravestones, pausing briefly near Eleanor's grave before disappearing into the undergrowth. Lily smiled. It seemed fitting somehow that the same snake that had started this journey was still watching over things. Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring day. By 2 o'clock, a large crowd had gathered in the cemetery. Chairs had been set up near Eleanor's grave, with a small podium and microphone for the speakers. Lily was surprised to see how many people had come, not just locals, but news crews from neighboring cities, and even some descendants of Dr. Blackwood's other victims, who had learned about the case from the news coverage. The mayor spoke first, talking about the importance of truth and justice even when delayed by a century. Then Dr. Patel explained his findings in simple terms, confirming for everyone that Eleanor had indeed been poisoned over a period of weeks, not claimed by tuberculosis as the official record had stated. When it was Thomas's turn, he spoke eloquently about the historical significance of the case, about the ways in which women like Eleanor and Mary Davis had tried to stand up against a powerful man in an era when women's voices were often silenced. "What's remarkable about this case," he said, "isn't just that we've uncovered a murder from 1923. It's that we've uncovered the courage of two women who tried to stop a killer, even when all the power structures of their time worked against them. Eleanor Blackwood died trying to protect others from her husband's experiments. Mary Davis risked her career and reputation trying to expose him. Neither succeeded in their lifetimes, but today we finally honor their bravery." Then it was Lily's turn. She had been nervous about speaking in front of so many people, but as she approached the podium and looked out at the attentive faces, the words came naturally. "I never met Eleanor Blackwood," she began. "By the time I found her diary, she had been gone for 100 years. But through her words, I came to know her intelligence, her compassion, her growing fear as she realized what her husband was doing, and her determination to stop him despite the danger to herself." Lily paused, glancing at the grave beside her. "I'm a botanist, not a detective. I study plants, not people. But that morning when I followed a snake to this grave, something changed. I became connected to a woman who died long before I was born, a woman who needed someone to hear her story, to find the truth she had tried to reveal." She told the crowd about finding the diary, about working with Thomas to piece together the evidence, about the key in Eleanor's hand that led them to Dr. Blackwood's damning journal. Eleanor's last diary entry ended mid-sentence, Lily said. Her voice was cut off by her husband's final act of silencing her. "But today we finish her sentence. We complete her story. We say what she was trying to say, that Dr. Robert Blackwood was poisoning his patients in unauthorized experiments, and then murdered his wife when she discovered his crimes." After the formal speeches, the crowd moved to the Historical Society for the unveiling of a permanent exhibit about the case. Display cases held Eleanor's diary, Mary's journal, photographs, newspaper clippings, and copies of the medical evidence. A special section was devoted to Dr. Blackwood's victims, with what information they had been able to gather about each person whose life had been cut short by his experiments. As people moved through the exhibit, Lily overheard their conversations. Expressions of outrage at what Dr. Blackwood had done, admiration for Eleanor and Mary's courage, and amazement that the truth had finally come to light after so many years. Peter Wilson, Mary Davis's grandson, had come for the memorial service. He found Lily in the crowd and shook her hand warmly. "Grandma would be pleased," he said. "She never talked about Oakwood, but she kept all those papers for a reason. She was waiting for someone to find them, to finish what she and Eleanor started." "I wish I could have known them," Lily said. "In a way, you do know them," Peter replied. "You've told their story. That's a kind of knowing." As the afternoon wore on, the crowd gradually thinned. Eventually, only Lily, Thomas, and a few Historical Society members remained. They sat in the quiet room, surrounded by the evidence of a century-old crime and the courage of those who had tried to stop it. "What happens now?" one of the society members asked. "We keep telling the story," Thomas said. "We make sure Eleanor and the other victims are remembered. We use this case to teach about medical ethics, about believing women when they speak up, about the importance of preserving historical records. And we're writing a book," Lily added. "The complete story of Eleanor Blackwood, Mary Davis, and how they tried to stop a killer." The next day, a stone mason came to the cemetery to begin work on Eleanor's new headstone. The simple design had been approved by the Historical Society and the Cemetery Board. It would read,